Isaac Netero's Pure Paladin squad would have put every other group of Nen Masters in the Hunter x Hunter world to shame. If the Pure Paladin squad existed, then the Phantom Troop wouldn't be an issue. The Zodiacs of the Hunter Association, mate, they are a mere shadow lingering far, far behind them, and the Chimera Ant Royal Guard would have been exterminated with terrifying efficiency. The Pure Paladin squad are an extremely important part of Hunter x Hunter world history. The story of why they existed, and much more importantly, the story of why they were eventually disbanded. Now, you may not have heard the name Pure Paladin Squad before, and that's because they're called the Seirin Group in the official English translation of the 2011 anime, which doesn't quite have the same ring to it, but it is very faithful to the original Japanese, where this group is referred to as the Seirintai, and in the manga they're described as legendary, although in the anime what they are called is highly versatile. Again, it doesn't quite have the same oomph to it, because Hunter x Hunter is a very weird series. The exact same events can play out in the manga and the anime, and they get translated so radically differently. Which is why if you're a manga reader, you will have been left salivating at the reveal of this group, and if you're an anime watcher, you'll have probably forgotten that this organization even existed. But as depicted in either medium, we see a series of mostly unrecognizable silhouettes, and it's highly doubtful that we would know any of these characters aside from Netero himself, because there's no telling just how long ago this organization existed. The issue with talking about anything Isaac Netero related is that at the time of his death, he could have been anywhere from 122 to well into his 300s and maybe even beyond, which makes pinpointing these very vague parts of his history very difficult. But rather curiously, Isaac Netero is never identified as the leader of the Pure Paladin squad. He's simply said to have been a member of the squad, to have belonged to it. He could have been their leader, but he also could have been not that. And given that the Pure Paladin squad was a faction working directly within the Hunter Association, this may imply that the squad existed prior to Netero's ascension to the position of chairman, and that perhaps the Pure Paladin squad was the 11th chairman's equivalent of the Zodiacs. The Zodiacs were of course a group built by Isaac Netero, primarily for the purpose of amusing himself, and it's a system that has been retained by current chairman Shiro Yorkshire. But the chairman prior to Netero had a completely different system. But despite its minimal mentions in the series, we do have a fair few clues to decipher the purpose of the Pure Paladin squad, which should really begin with that second word. The earliest mentions of paladins within the history are the 12 legendary paladins of Charlemagne, king of the Franks, with the term paladin being derived from the Latin palatinus, meaning close retainers, which is very similar to the purpose that the Zodiac served under Netero. They were his own personal Knights of the Round Table, and I would say that they were his most trusted associates, except that Netero deliberately went out of his way to hire people that he couldn't trust because that made life more interesting for him. But the Pure Paladin squad is a name known throughout the Hunter Association, and it has some level of reverence, as an attempt at its revival was made during the 13th chairman election by Terra Day Neutral, as following Isaac Netero's death, it was done under the pretense of hunting the licensed hunter Ilmi Zoldyck and bringing him to justice. So this use of the proposed revived Pure Paladin squad may imply that this organization was some sort of internal hunter police force, which is very much in line with the 4th Hunter bylaw, as hunters are mostly, yet not completely, immune from the concept of justice. The 4th bylaw states that hunters shall not target other hunters unless they commit heinous crimes, which has always fascinated me because outside of the attempted action against Ilmi, the heinous crimes of hunters were mostly ignored by the Netero administration. So the Pure Paladin squad could have been an organization founded to enforce that 4th bylaw. And we do know that this squad was made up of pretty much exclusively Nen users who specialize in raw force. In fact, one of the reasons why Moral declines an invitation to join the revived Pure Paladin squad was because he isn't a combat specialist. Moral is the ultimate in Nen support staff designed for very specific missions. Even stuff like the Chimera Ant extermination was never meant to be a mission of power and force. It was about strategic placement, and the people chosen for this mission were selected for their ability to implement that plan. And speaking of Moral, earlier I stated that it's very difficult to ascertain when this group existed. However, I guess we do have one clue in the form of Moral, as during the chairman election arc, he does appear to be quite familiar with the Pure Paladin squad. It's extremely unlikely that he was a member for all of the reasons it is that I just said, as well as the ones that Moral himself in the series has stated, but the fact that Moral has some understanding of the Pure Paladin squad would imply that they may have existed during his lifetime. Not that that's a huge help either, because Moral's age has never been revealed to us. If I had to guess, I'd say 40s, maybe 50s because of his experience, maybe late 30s if he's aged terribly. However, because Moral was also so close to Chairman Netero, it's also possible that Moral had heard Netero's personal accounts of his days in the Pure Paladin squad, and and may have much more insight into their legend than the vast majority of other hunters within the association. Personally, I feel like the squad definitely predated Moral, but not necessarily by a lot, because I, man on the internet, have been making a lot of assumptions about this squad being a remnant of the 11th chairman's reign. However, there is one very powerful reason why Netero would have wanted to assemble such a squad during his administration, and like so much of Hunter x Hunter, that reasoning comes back to the Dark Continent. Prior to the modern-day Karkian expedition, the last recorded journey to the Dark Continent was 50 years ago, and that was the voyage where Beyond Netero found Zobai with the Kukanyu Kingdom, and also the voyage that caused Netero to lobby the V5 to ban Dark Continent travel entirely. Other than finding a powerful opponent to fight battle, this is the strongest that Isaac Netero has ever felt about any given issue in his life, and I can definitely see him founding a faction within the Hunter Association itself to enforce this travel ban, to defend the integrity of the human realm and keep it pure and such, and also to potentially send out on secret missions to investigate and hunt Dark Continent calamities that had already made it to the human realm. The results of which could be why the V5 have this specially dedicated facility to evidence collected all throughout the world. I say all throughout the world, all throughout the human world. And for this purpose, Netero, given his own experience on the Dark Continent, would have known that only the most exceptional of hunters would be suited to the job, with the Chimera and Crisis being an outlier to the focus on strength, due to the fact that the more raw power you throw at the ants, the more power you are potentially feeding to them to use against you. And also the fact that the Pure Paladin squad was long gone by the time the ants came around. But one thing that doesn't really sit quite right with me in regards to this idea is why Netero would have disbanded the Pure Paladin squad before this travel ban was lifted. And also why there are no known remaining members of the Pure Paladin squad left. We do have assumptions and theories. I would personally speculate that Lene Hors d'oeuvre would have been a member because she went to the Dark Continent with Netero and appears to have been a powerful companion of his, and my other speculated member would be Botabai Gigante, who is the eldest and very potentially most powerful member of the Zodiacs. But then again, this group could have predated them by a century or two. Maybe not Lene, because I think she's about as old as Netero, but the word that I take most issue with is the word pure, because that is a bit of a philosophical disagreement with Netero. His style of chairmanship was never really focused on purity and doing what's right for the sake of human moralities. Definitely not. Netero was much more of an all-or-nothing gambler, seeking the strength that he believed was required for humanity to prosper in any given area, and also to find his perfect opponent. And if that opponent had existed on the Dark Continent, then I have no doubt that he would not have fought as hard or even at all for a travel ban, despite the dangers that it could have brought. But Isaac Netero molded the Hunter Association in his image. So at the moment, I do think the stronger idea is that the Pure Paladin squad could have been the vision of the former chairman, a leader who may have been much more justice-oriented, who presided over the association in an age where hunters were designed to be far more noble. And then eventually, Netero became chairman, and most of the former members of the Pure Paladin squad got too old and died anyway. And so Netero founded the Zodiacs as a replacement force, as aside from Botabai, they're all quite young, or at least they all look quite young. Again, we don't know most of their exact ages. But as alluded to before, there was a genuine attempt to resurrect the Pure Paladin squad. In chapter 329, a character who no one remembers named Teradane Neutral made an announcement that he was reviving the Pure Paladin squad under new leadership. Now again, Teradane is a guy who no one remembers, but he was a double-star human resources hunter, which is a big deal. It is not easy to obtain a double-star license, and by all reports, Teradane is a pretty decent guy overall, and he was even accused of being too honest. So I can see why he in particular may want to reinvest in this element of purity within the Hunter Association to bring us back to more noble times. However, Teradane's group within the Hunter Association were often referred to as the anti-Netero faction, which is not to be confused with Pariston's faction, which confusingly was both pro and anti-Netero, depending on which stance made the game of politics more fun at any given moment. But this makes Teradane's group sound like they're antagonists against us, because we generally like Netero, but they may very well have had better intentions for this world than Netero did. For example, Bushidora Ambitious was a member of Teradane's group and the original leader of the revived Pure Paladin squad, another upstanding member of society who had pledged to uphold the Hunter bylaws, and the most morally grey member of this faction was Loop Highland. And I'd love to tell you more about him, but he's a very hollow, smart guy with a glasses trope who doesn't stick around long enough to really do anything of note. He's played as this very cold, calculating man. He's not afraid to cross lines, but it doesn't matter because he gets completely trounced by Pariston in a modicum of mental arithmetic. Pariston even comments about how much he loves Loop, Teradane, and Bushidora because of how easy they are to manipulate. complete, so these guys never had a chance of completing what they set out to do. Although, to their credit, they did succeed in reviving the Pure Paladin squad for about a day, during which time 8 members of the new squad were sent to eliminate Ilmi Zoldyck, only 2 of which have names being Latun and Kenzaki. These 2 hunters are never actually seen on screen or on page, because they get killed by Ilmi too quickly for Togashi to draw them. However, they are said to have been quite serious pro hunters. Although I can't help but feel that the standards of a pro hunter were significantly lower among Terradane's faction. And in addition to them, the leader of Pure Paladin 2.0, Bushidora Ambitious, is also killed off-screen by Hisoka. And after his complete and utter failure, Terradane had to make a rather embarrassing announcement, stating that his Pure Paladin squad currently lacked the power to bring the Rogue Hunter to justice, which then killed his chances of becoming the next chairman of the Hunter Association almost as quickly as Hisoka proceeded to literally kill him after the announcement had concluded. And this was also when Moral officially declined to join the group, calling this squad pathetic and that they were too weak to claim the Pure Paladin name. However, while Terradane and Bushidora are definitely dead, Loop's status is currently unknown, and he may have survived, and if so, he would technically be the only known living member of a Pure Paladin squad. And this isn't something that I often do, but special occasion, we are going to talk about the Hunter x Hunter movies. Because what the movies do is they take little stuff like this, Togashi's small nuggets that he'll probably never elaborate on, and they try so hard to turn them into something. And so in Hunter x Hunter The Last Mission, this film introduces what appears to have been a counterforce to the Pure Paladin squad, which are a group called the Shadow. This was another sub-faction within the history of the Hunter Association that was charged with completing more unpleasant missions that were never meant to be made public and even hidden from the vast majority of hunters themselves, until the Shadow discovered and used a completely new power system in the Hunter x Hunter world called On, which was said to be fueled by pure hate. I can't emphasize this enough, I really don't like this movie. I think it's pretty undeniable proof that no one should be writing Hunter x Hunter except for Togashi. However, it is interesting that the Shadow do seem to have been created in response to the idea of the Pure Paladin squad. And with that, within the One Association, you have this faction of pure warriors fighting for all of the traditionally held good beliefs, and within that same framework, you have these human demons of hatred embracing the much darker aspects of humanity, with both of these groups working in tandem to support the same association. And I should say that in the movie, Netero saw the Shadow as far too dangerous and eventually disbanded them, but in the canon Hunter x Hunter world, he did the same thing for the Pure Paladin squad, which fits pretty perfectly into the tone of Hunter x Hunter. This world is neither good nor evil, and it doesn't predominantly strive to be either, it just exists somewhere in this messy middle with a constant blend between the two. And the Last Mission film also implies that the Pure Paladin squad were used to exterminate the Shadow, which would give us a pretty decent timeline for their existence if the film was canon, but Togashi had no involvement in this, and nothing that the films present should be taken as anything but high production quality fanfiction. However, the Pure Paladin squad was very much real, they did exist, and they had a massive impact on the Hunter x Hunter world that, again, Togashi will unfortunately probably never expand on.